What's the most shocking wedding altar confession you've ever seen? Mine happened at my cousin Bridget's ceremony last September. The church smelled like stargazer lilies and old wood, that particular scent that clings to your clothes for hours. I was sitting 3 rows back, watching Bridget in her champagne-colored gown, when her fiancé Trevor cleared his throat into the microphone. "Before we continue," he said, his voice steady in a way that made my stomach drop, "I need everyone here to know something." The officiant froze mid-gesture. Bridget's face went pale beneath her makeup, that carefully applied foundation suddenly looking mask-like under the afternoon light filtering through stained glass. I could see her hands trembling against her bouquet. "Bridget and I haven't been honest with you all," Trevor continued. "This wedding isn't happening because we're in love." I felt my mom's hand grip my arm. Around us, 200 guests collectively held their breath. You could hear everything in that suspended moment. The air conditioning humming, someone's phone vibrating on silent, the rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted forward in their seats. "It's happening because 6 months ago we made a business decision," he said. "Bridget's inheritance from her grandmother requires her to be married by her 30th birthday. That's next month. I get $250,000 for playing husband for 2 years. After that, we divorce, split her trust fund, and walk away." The silence shattered. Bridget's mom let out a sound I'd never heard a human make before. My uncle stood up so fast his chair clattered backward. But what I remember most clearly was Bridget's expression. Not shame, not panic, but something closer to relief. "I'm tired of pretending," she said, taking the microphone from Trevor. Her voice was surprisingly calm. "I'm tired of this family treating love like a performance, marriage like a checkbox. Grandmother's will was designed to control me from beyond the grave, to force me into the same miserable marriage she endured for 43 years. So yes, Trevor and I made a deal. We drew up contracts. We planned the exit strategy. And honestly, I don't regret it." My Aunt Lorraine stood up, her face twisted with rage. "You selfish, ungrateful little—" "Sit down, Lorraine," said a voice from the back of the church. Everyone turned. My grandmother, Bridget's other grandmother, Mom's mother, was walking down the aisle. At 83, she moved slowly, but there was nothing frail about the way she carried herself. "I knew about the arrangement," she said, reaching the altar. "I've known for months. Since June, actually." The shock rippled through the room again. Mom's hand tightened on my arm until I could feel my pulse throbbing against her fingers. "What you didn't know, Bridget," my grandmother continued, "is that your other grandmother and I had our own arrangement, one that supersedes her will entirely, one we drafted together before she died." She pulled an envelope from her handbag. The paper looked official, expensive, legal, the kind that gets notarized by attorneys who charge by the minute. "This changes everything," she said, handing it to Bridget. "Read it, out loud." Bridget's hands shook as she opened the envelope. I watched her eyes scan the first few lines, watched the color drain from her face completely. "No," she whispered. "This isn't possible." "Read it," my grandmother repeated. Bridget looked at Trevor, then at the congregation, then back at the paper. When she spoke, her voice barely carried past the first row. "In the event that Bridget Castellano enters into a fraudulent marriage for the purpose of accessing her inheritance, all assets shall be immediately transferred to—" She stopped. The paper slipped from her fingers, floating down to rest against her champagne train. Trevor bent to pick it up. I watched him read, watched his face go from confused to horrified to something darker. "To her cousin," he finished reading, his voice hollow. He looked directly at me. So did Bridget. So did everyone in that church. 200 pairs of eyes finding me in the 3rd row. My grandmother smiled. I couldn't breathe. The church felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Mom's grip on my arm shifted from restraint to something more protective, like she was anchoring me to my seat. "What?" I managed to say, the word barely audible even to myself. My grandmother turned to address the congregation, her voice carrying that practiced authority she'd perfected over decades of running her own accounting firm. "My friend Dorothy, Bridget's paternal grandmother, came to me 18 months before she passed. She was worried about what her husband's will was doing to this family, how it was turning marriage into a transaction, love into an obligation." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembled guests. I could see my Aunt Lorraine sinking back into her seat, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. "Dorothy and I spent months working with her attorneys," my grandmother continued. "She couldn't change her late husband's will. He'd been meticulous about that, God rest his controlling soul. But she could create a failsafe, a way to protect the family from exactly what we're witnessing today." Bridget was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark rivulets. Trevor had backed away from her, the document still clutched in his hand like evidence of a crime. "The terms are simple," my grandmother said, looking directly at me now. "If Bridget attempts to defraud the estate through a sham marriage, the entire inheritance, $3.2 million, transfers to the next eligible heir. Someone Dorothy trusted to use it wisely. Someone who actually needed it. Not someone treating it like a game to win." My mouth had gone completely dry. $3.2 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like something you'd hear on a game show, not something real people inherited at family weddings. "I don't want it," I said, louder than I intended. The words echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Grandma, I didn't know about any of this." "I know you didn't, sweetheart." Her voice was gentle now. "That's precisely why Dorothy chose you." The church erupted, not all at once, but in waves. My uncle started shouting at my grandmother. Aunt Lorraine was screaming at Bridget. Trevor's parents, sitting on the groom's side, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, were having a heated, whispered argument. The bridesmaids had clustered together near the altar, watching the scene unfold with varying expressions of shock and fascination. I stood up without meaning to, my body moving on autopilot. Mom tried to pull me back down, but I shook her off as gently as I could. My legs felt unsteady as I moved into the aisle, walking toward the altar through a gauntlet of staring faces. "Stop," I said when I reached the front. No one heard me over the chaos. "Stop." This time my voice cut through. The shouting died down to murmurs, then to silence again. I looked at Bridget. We'd never been particularly close. 6 years separated us, different high schools, different friend groups. She'd always seemed so confident, so put together, the kind of person who knew what wine to order at dinner parties, who had her retirement account set up at 23, who made adulting look effortless. Seeing her now, makeup ruined, wedding dress rumpled, I saw something I'd missed before. How exhausted she looked, how much weight she'd been carrying alone. "Is it true?" I asked her. "All of it?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. Trevor and I met at a networking event. We got talking about family expectations, toxic inheritance structures. He needed money for his startup. I needed to satisfy a dead man's last attempt to control my life. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. We thought we were being clever, adult about it. A mutually beneficial arrangement. "And you were really going to go through with it? 2 years of pretending?" 2 years seemed manageable. Her voice was so quiet I had to lean in to hear her. Easier than fighting the will in court. Definitely easier than admitting to everyone that I was 30 and single and perfectly fine with that. You know what this family's like. Every holiday, every birthday, someone asking when I was going to settle down, find a nice man, start giving them great-grandchildren. She finally looked at me. I just wanted them to stop. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. The Castellano family had strong opinions about how life should be lived, and they weren't shy about sharing them. My own mother had been fielding the same questions about my lack of romantic prospects since I graduated college 3 years ago. "Trevor," I said, turning to him, "did you love her at all?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "No, I barely knew her, honestly. But $250,000 for 2 years?" He shrugged helplessly. "I have student loans from business school, credit card debt, investors pressuring me about my company's runway." It seemed like the answer to everything. It was an answer, my grandmother interjected, just not the one either of you expected. I picked up the document from where Trevor had dropped it on the altar steps. The legalese was dense, but the key points were clear enough. Fraudulent marriage, immediate transfer of assets, no contest clause. There were signatures at the bottom. Dorothy Castellano and my grandmother, dated March of last year. 2 witnesses I didn't recognize, probably lawyers. Everything official and binding and completely real. "I need some air," I said, still clutching the papers. Mom appeared at my elbow. "I'll come with you." "No." I held up a hand. "I need to think. Alone, please." I walked back down the aisle, past all those staring faces, past my relatives and Bridget's friends and Trevor's business partners. Someone, one of the ushers maybe, held the heavy wooden door open for me. The September afternoon hit me like a wave. Warm sunshine, the smell of cut grass from the church lawn, the distant sound of traffic from the main road. There was a bench under an oak tree at the edge of the property. I sat down hard, the document still in my hands, and tried to process what had just happened. $3.2 million. I lived in a studio apartment in a converted warehouse on the edge of the city. The building had charm, exposed brick, big windows, but also mice and a landlord who took 3 weeks to fix the water heater. I worked as a junior editor at a mid-sized publishing house, making $38,000 a year before taxes. My car was a 15-year-old Honda with a broken air conditioner and a passenger side mirror held on with duct tape. $3.2 million would change everything, would change my life in ways I couldn't begin to imagine, except I hadn't earned it, hadn't done anything to deserve it except exist, except be the acceptable alternative when my cousin tried to game a system that was already rigged. "Mind if I sit?" I looked up. My dad was standing a few feet away, jacket slung over his shoulder, tie loosened. He looked tired. But then again, my dad always looked tired. 20 years as a public defender would do that. "It's a public bench," I said. He sat, leaving space between us. We watched a robin hunt for worms in the grass for a while, neither of us speaking. "Your grandmother," he finally said, "is a piece of work. That's one way to put it. She called me last night, told me what was going to happen today, made me promise not to tell you or your mother." I turned to look at him. "And you didn't?" "Attorney-client privilege doesn't apply to family secrets, but marriage does. I told your mother I couldn't discuss it. She assumed it was work-related." He smiled grimly. "I've been dreading this all day, knowing what was coming and not being able to warn anyone. Why did Grandma Dorothy pick me? Dad considered this. You ever meet her? I know she passed when you were pretty young. Once, maybe twice. I remember her teaching me to play gin rummy at a family reunion. She let me win. She did that with everyone at first," Dad said. "Made you feel good about yourself. Then she'd start winning, and you'd realize she'd been studying your tells the whole time, learning how you played, waiting for the right moment to strike." He shifted on the bench. "She was brilliant, ruthless sometimes, but brilliant. Made a fortune in commercial real estate in the 70s when women weren't even supposed to be in the business. Your uncle always said she was sharper than her husband ever was. Then why did she go along with his will? Why make Bridget jump through these hoops at all? Because she was dying, and sometimes when you're dying, you pick your battles. She couldn't undo everything her husband had done, but she could plant a bomb in the foundation, make sure that if someone tried to exploit his system, there would be consequences." Dad looked at me. She met you at that reunion. You were what, 10? 11? And she told me afterward that you reminded her of herself at that age. Observant, careful, not trying to impress anyone. I was shy. You were watchful. There's a difference. He paused. She asked about you over the years. Through your grandmother, wanted to know what you were doing, how you were managing. When she got sick and started planning with your grandmother, she specifically requested that you be the failsafe, not any of the other cousins. Not your brother. You. Great, I said flatly. So I'm inheriting money because a woman I barely knew thought I had good gin rummy tells. You're inheriting money because two smart women wanted to make a point about family, control, and what we pass down to the next generation, whether you asked for that or not. We sat in silence again. Inside the church, I could hear raised voices. The argument was clearly still ongoing. What do? I asked. That's not for me to decide. Dad, I'm serious. He stood, shrugging his jacket back on. This is your decision. You're 25 years old enough to figure out what you want and what you're willing to accept. Your mother and I will support whatever you choose, even if it's complicated. Everything about this is complicated. Exactly. He kissed the top of my head, something he hadn't done since I was a teenager. Take your time, think it through, and remember that sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one. He walked back toward the church, leaving me alone with the document and my tangled thoughts. I read through the papers more carefully this time, parsing the legal language. There were provisions I'd missed on the first read. The money would come with conditions. It had to be held in trust until I turned 30, managed by a board that included my grandmother and 2 attorneys. I could draw from it for education, medical expenses, or to start a business, but there were approval processes, oversight committees. Dorothy Castellano hadn't just handed over a blank check. She'd created a structure, a framework, a test, maybe. My phone buzzed. Text messages flooding in. My brother, WTF is happening? Friends from college who'd somehow already heard through the grapevine. A missed call from my landlord, probably unrelated, probably about the mice again, but terrible timing either way. I silenced the phone and slipped it into my purse. The church door opened again. Bridget emerged, still in her wedding dress, though she'd kicked off her heels. She spotted me and hesitated, then walked across the grass in bare feet. Her dress picked up grass stains and dirt along the hem. The train dragged behind her, champagne silk going gray-green. Can we talk? She asked. I gestured to the bench. She gathered her skirts and sat, though there wasn't quite enough room for all the fabric. Tulle and silk spilled over the sides, pooling on the ground. I'm sorry, she said. For what, specifically? For all of it. For putting you in this position. For being stupid enough to think we wouldn't get caught. She twisted her engagement ring. A modest solitaire, I notice now. Nothing flashy. For treating something sacred like a business transaction. Do you actually care about sacred things? Or are you just sorry you're not getting the money? It came out harsher than I'd intended. Bridget flinched but didn't look away. Both, she said. I'm not going to pretend I'm some noble martyr. I wanted that money. Needed it even. Grandmother's money was supposed to let me finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. Stop answering to partners at the firm who treat me like I'm still a paralegal even though I passed the bar 2 years ago. She pulled at a loose thread on her dress. But I actually liked Trevor. Not love, maybe, but we got along. Made each other laugh. I thought maybe after the 2 years were up, after we got divorced, we might even stay friends. Stupid, right? Maybe not stupid. Optimistic. Same thing in this family. She managed a weak smile. We're Castellanos. We plan for worst-case scenarios and treat hope like a liability. I couldn't argue with that. My own mother kept 3 months of expenses in an emergency fund, had extra car insurance, made me text when I got home from anywhere. The family operated on a baseline assumption that disaster was always one bad decision away. What happens now? Bridget asked. With the money, I mean. Are you going to take it? I don't know. You should. She said it quickly, firmly. You absolutely should. You didn't do anything wrong. You're not the one who tried to cheat the system. Neither did you, really. You were trying to navigate an impossible situation. By lying to everyone. By hiring a fake husband. She shook her head. No, I made choices. Bad ones. And apparently Grandmother Dorothy saw right through me even from the grave. Did you know her well? Better than you did. She used to take me to lunch once a month from the time I was 16 until she got too sick to leave the house. We'd go to this Italian place in the North End, and she'd tell me stories about building her business, about fighting to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who thought she was there to take notes. Bridget smiled at the memory. She never talked about grandfather's will, though. Never warned me about the marriage requirement. I found out about that when the lawyers read the will after she'd been dead for 3 months. Maybe she couldn't figure out how to tell you. Or maybe she wanted to see what I'd do. Test whether I'd fight it or find a loophole. Bridget looked at me. She chose you for a reason. You know that, right? This wasn't random. Grandmother Dorothy did everything with intention. Your grandmother and mine must have been quite the pair. They were friends for 40 years. Did you know that? Met at some charity gala in the 80s and stayed close until the end. She stood, gathering her dress. I need to go back in there, face everyone, figure out what to say to Trevor. You're not going through with the wedding, I assume. She laughed, sharp and bitter. No, though honestly, after that confession, I don't think any officiant in the state would agree to marry us anyway. I watched her walk back toward the church, the ruined dress trailing behind her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Not the confident corporate lawyer who always had the right answer, but just another person trying to figure out how to move forward after everything fell apart. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. It was my grandmother. "We need to talk. Come back inside when you're ready. Take your time." I typed back, 15 minutes. I needed those 15 minutes. Needed to sit in the September sunshine and feel the ground beneath my feet and remember who I was before this happened. Before inheritance and fraudulent marriages and family drama rearranged my understanding of my place in the world. When I finally walked back into the church, the crowd had thinned considerably. Trevor's side of the family had apparently left entirely. The groom's pews sat empty except for a few abandoned programs and a forgotten boutonniere. My relatives had clustered into small groups, voices low but intense. I caught fragments as I walked down the aisle. Legal action, family reputation, poor Lorraine. My grandmother was sitting in the front pew, looking serene despite the chaos she'd unleashed. When she saw me, she patted the seat beside her. "You look overwhelmed," she said as I sat down. "That's because I am overwhelmed. Grandma, what were you thinking? You couldn't have told me about this beforehand? And give you time to worry? Time to talk yourself out of accepting?" "No." She folded her hands in her lap. "Dorothy and I agreed. This had to be a surprise, for everyone, including you. Otherwise it wouldn't work." "Wouldn't work how?" "As a lesson." She turned to look at me directly. "You know what Dorothy told me when we were planning this?" She said, "The money doesn't matter. Money never matters as much as people think it will. What matters is showing these children that actions have consequences, that trying to manipulate the system will blow up in their faces." "So this whole thing was educational?" "This whole thing was necessary." Her voice was firm. "Bridget isn't a bad person, but she was making a terrible decision and someone needed to stop her before she wasted 2 years of her life in a sham marriage. You couldn't have just talked to her?" "We tried." Dorothy tried. Bridget wouldn't listen. She was convinced she had it all figured out. My grandmother sighed. "Sometimes you can't talk someone out of a bad decision. Sometimes you have to let them walk right up to the edge and see for themselves how far the fall would be." Mom appeared from somewhere, looking frazzled. She'd been crying. Her mascara was smudged, and her nose was red. "We need to go," she said. "Now. Before someone says something they'll regret." "Too late for that," my grandmother said mildly. "Mother." Mom's voice had an edge I rarely heard. "You've made your point. Let's go home." In the car, my parents' sensible sedan, not my dying Honda, nobody spoke. My dad drove with his usual careful attention to the speed limit. Mom stared out the window, arms crossed. My grandmother hummed something tuneless under her breath. I sat in the back, the document folder on my lap, feeling like I was 13 again, and they'd just picked me up from a school dance that had gone wrong. "For the record," Mom finally said, not turning around, "I think what you did today was cruel." "Noted," my grandmother replied. "That's it? Just noted? What do you want me to say, Eleanor? That I'm sorry?" "I'm not." Bridget was about to commit fraud. Trevor was enabling her. Someone needed to intervene. By humiliating them in front of 200 people? By telling the truth. My grandmother's voice was steady. "Sometimes the truth is humiliating. That doesn't make it wrong to speak it." Mom made a sound of frustration. My dad reached over and squeezed her hand, the universal signal for, "Let it go." She did, but the silence in the car after that was thick enough to choke on. At my parents' house, a modest colonial in the suburbs where I'd grown up, we reconvened in the kitchen. This was where all family decisions got made, had been as long as I could remember. Mom started making coffee even though it was 4 in the afternoon. Dad loosened his tie all the way and sat at the table. My grandmother took her usual seat by the window. I stood by the counter, still holding the folder. "I need to understand something," I said. "This money, it's really mine? Legally?" "Legally, yes," Dad confirmed. "Dorothy's will was ironclad. Your grandmother and I reviewed it with 3 different attorneys. As soon as Bridget publicly admitted to the fraudulent nature of her intended marriage, the conditions were met. The money transfers to you. What if I don't want it?" Everyone looked at me. "Why wouldn't you want it?" Mom asked. "Because it feels wrong, like profiting from someone else's mistake." "You didn't make the mistake," my grandmother said. "Bridget did. But I didn't do anything to earn it either." "Neither did she." My grandmother leaned forward. "That's the whole point. This money, all of it, came from Dorothy's work, Dorothy's intelligence, Dorothy's business acumen. Her husband contributed to the real estate ventures, yes, but Dorothy was the one who saw the opportunities, made the deals happen, turned initial investments into a fortune, and then her husband died and left a will that treated that fortune like a tool to control his granddaughter's life choices." She paused, letting that sink in. Dorothy couldn't change the will, but she could add a condition, a final lesson. If Bridget accepted the terms, truly accepted them, and married someone she loved, she would have gotten the money. But if she tried to manipulate the system, tried to fake her way through for the payout, then someone else would benefit. Someone who hadn't tried to game the system. Someone who simply lived their life honestly. "I'm not that honest," I said quietly. "I'm not some paragon of virtue." "No one is," Dad said. "But you also weren't trying to commit fraud." The coffee maker beeped. Mom poured 4 mugs, added cream and sugar based on what she knew we each took, distributed them around the table. I sat down finally, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. "If I accept this," I said slowly, "what happens to Bridget?" "She gets nothing from her grandfather's estate," my grandmother said. "She still has her job, her own savings, her life. She's not destitute, just not suddenly wealthy. And Trevor gets nothing, which is exactly what he deserves." I sipped my coffee, thinking, $3.2 million. Even with the conditions, even in a trust fund, even with oversight, it was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was security, options, the ability to quit my job if I hated it, to go back to school, to help my parents with their mortgage, to finally fix my car properly instead of just patching it with duct tape and hope. It was also a weight, a responsibility, a connection to a woman I barely knew, and a family drama I'd never asked to be part of. I need time, I said finally, to think about this, to figure out what's right. Take all the time you need, Dad said. But not too much time, my grandmother added. The lawyers will need an answer within 30 days. After that, the money goes to charity, Dorothy's choice, some animal shelter she volunteered at. That's not in the document. It's in the supplementary paperwork, page 16. Of course there was supplementary paperwork. Of course there was a page 16. I took the folder upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which Mom had converted into a guest room but still had my old bookshelf and the desk where I'd written college application essays. I spread the documents across the desk and started reading properly. Every page, every clause, every footnote. It took 2 hours. When I came back downstairs, my grandmother had left. Mom was making dinner. Chicken and rice, comfort food. Dad was watching the news with the volume low. I'm going to accept it, I told them. Mom turned from the stove. Are you sure? No, but I don't think I'm supposed to be sure. I think that's part of the test. There's no test, Dad said. It's just money. Accept it, use it well, live your life. But it wasn't just money. Not really. It was a statement about family, about expectations, about the legacy we inherit and the choices we make with it. Dorothy Castellano had looked at her family's tendency to control and manipulate, and she'd created one last manipulation of her own, but this one designed to reveal truth instead of hide it. I called my grandmother that evening. I'll sign whatever paperwork needs signing, I told her. Good. She sounded satisfied. I'll have the lawyers send everything over. And sweetheart? Yeah? Use it for something that matters. Don't just park it in an account and forget about it. Dorothy wanted this money to do something useful. I will, I said, though I had no idea yet what that something would be. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers' offices and financial advisors and paperwork that made my eyes cross. The trust was complex, more complex than I'd initially understood. There were distributions, allowances, approval processes, but there was also flexibility, room for decisions, opportunities to do things I'd only fantasized about before. I didn't hear from Bridget during those weeks. Her number stayed silent in my phone. I thought about reaching out, but what would I say? Sorry I inherited the money you were trying to scam. Thanks for the opportunity? Nothing felt right. Then, 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, she called me. I'm not calling to ask for money, she said immediately. I know that's what you're thinking, but that's not why I'm calling. Okay. I wanted to apologize. Properly. Not the half-assed apology I gave you on the church lawn. A real one. She took a breath. I was selfish. I was stupid. And I'm sorry you got dragged into my mess. Thank you. And I wanted you to know. I'm going to therapy. Started last week. Turns out trying to fake marry someone for money is a symptom of bigger problems. She laughed, but it sounded more genuine than before. Who knew? How's Trevor? Gone. Back to California or Seattle or wherever he came from. His startup folded 2 weeks ago, so I guess he really did need that money. She paused. I don't think he was a bad person, just desperate. We both were. Desperation makes people do strange things. That's what my therapist says. Another pause. Look, I'm not asking to be friends or anything. I know that would be weird, but I didn't want you thinking I hated you. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you, really. Not on purpose. I tried to commit fraud for money. That's pretty wrong. You tried to escape a controlling situation using the only option you could see. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. You sound like Grandmother Dorothy. She would have said something like that. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. Her voice got softer. She would have liked seeing you with that money. Would have liked knowing it went to someone thoughtful. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. Weather, work, the family's reaction to everything. Then she said goodbye. And I had the sense that it might be the last time we spoke for a while. Maybe a long while. Some relationships are like that. They serve a purpose in a specific moment, and then they fade naturally, without malice. The money officially transferred on October 15th. I got a call from the trust administrator confirming everything was in place. All the accounts were active, all the paperwork was filed. $3.2 million, minus legal fees and taxes, managed according to Dorothy Castellano's specific instructions. I took myself to that Italian restaurant in the North End that Bridget had mentioned, the one where Dorothy had taken her for monthly lunches. It was a small place, tucked between a bakery and a shop selling imported olive oil. Red checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, the smell of garlic and basil thick in the air. I ordered what I imagined Dorothy might have ordered. Linguine with clams, a glass of white wine, tiramisu for dessert. I sat by the window and watched people pass on the street and thought about what it means to inherit something. Not just money, but expectations, history, the weight of someone else's choices. My phone buzzed. Text from my brother. Heard you're rich now? Can I borrow your car? Mine died. I typed back. I'll buy you a new one. What do you need? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. Seriously? Seriously. Birthday present. Early. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. That became my approach over the following months. Not grand gestures or dramatic changes, but small, intentional choices about what to do with resources I'd never expected to have. I paid off my parents' mortgage. They cried when I told them. Proper, ugly crying in the kitchen where we'd first discussed the inheritance. I set up college funds for my younger cousins, the ones who were still in high school and worried about student loans. I donated to the animal shelter Dorothy had loved. then volunteered there on weekends, learning why she'd cared so much about rescued dogs with trust issues. I kept my job at the publishing house, but I started saying no to projects that didn't interest me, yes to risks I wouldn't have taken before. I pitched a novel to my boss, something I'd been working on for 2 years in my spare time. She liked it enough to pass it up the chain. Nothing might come of it, but at least I'd tried. I moved out of the studio with mice and into a 1-bedroom with actual closets and a dishwasher. Not fancy, I wasn't trying to live large, just comfortable. A place that felt like home instead of a place I was just passing through. And slowly, carefully, I started figuring out what Dorothy Castellano had meant about using money for something that matters. I established a scholarship fund for women over 30 going back to school, for people who'd had to delay their education for work or family or 1,000 other reasons, who needed help making that leap. The first recipient was a 42-year-old mother of 3 who wanted to become a nurse. She sent me a thank you card with a picture of her kids holding a sign that said, "We're proud of you, Mama." I kept it on my refrigerator. I funded a legal clinic for people fighting predatory inheritance clauses, situations like Bridget's, where family members used wills and trusts to control behavior from beyond the grave. The clinic helped people understand their options, navigate complex legal systems, push back against manipulation disguised as legacy. I learned to say I inherited money without shame or apology, and also without arrogance. It became a fact, not a definition, something that had happened to me, not something that made me who I was. At Thanksgiving that year, the whole family gathered at my Aunt Lorraine's house. It was awkward at first. Everyone knew what had happened, and no one quite knew how to act around me. But my grandmother broke the tension by loudly announcing that she'd brought 3 pies, and if people wanted dessert, they'd better be civil during dinner. Bridget was there too. We nodded at each other across the room, a moment of acknowledgement without drama. She looked better than she had at the wedding, calmer, more centered. She was talking to one of our younger cousins about law school applications, gesturing animatedly with a glass of wine. Later, as people were leaving, she found me in the kitchen helping with dishes. "You did good things with it," she said quietly. "The scholarship fund, the legal clinic, I heard about them. I'm trying." Dorothy would have approved. She dried a serving platter, set it carefully on the counter. I used to resent her, for the will situation, for putting all that pressure on me. But my therapist helped me see. She was trying to free me, not trap me. She knew I'd never be happy living according to someone else's timeline. Took a pretty dramatic intervention to make the point. She wasn't subtle. Bridget smiled. Neither is your grandmother. They made a good team. We finished the dishes in companionable silence, and when we were done, she gave me a quick hug before heading out to her car. I stayed late, helping my aunt put away leftovers and wipe down counters. The house was quiet now, just family sounds. Someone laughing in the living room, a football game on TV, my dad and uncle arguing amicably about nothing important. "You handled all this well," my aunt said suddenly. She'd barely spoken to me all evening, still processing everything that had happened. The money, the attention, staying grounded. That's not easy. I'm figuring it out as I go. We all are. She folded the dish towel with precise corners, the way she did everything. For what it's worth, I was angry at first. Angry at you, angry at your grandmother, angry at Dorothy. But watching you these past few months, seeing what you're doing with it, I think they chose right. Thank you. She nodded, then went back to the living room, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the clean counters and the leftover pie and the weight of her words. On the drive home that night, I thought about inheritance. Not just money, but all the things we received from the people who came before us. Grandmother Dorothy had given me wealth, yes, but also a lesson about agency and choice. My grandmother had given me the shock of that September afternoon, but also confidence that I could handle what came after. My parents had given me a foundation stable enough to stand on when everything shifted, and I was learning to give back. Not because I had to, not to prove anything, but because Dorothy was right. Money doesn't matter as much as what you do with it. I still drive past that church sometimes, the one where everything changed. The memories are vivid. Trevor's confession, Bridget's tears, 200 people holding their breath, my grandmother walking down the aisle with purpose. But time has softened the edges, turned crisis into story. I never learned to play gin rummy properly, despite Dorothy teaching me that one time. Maybe I should learn now, in her honor. Maybe that's another thing I inherited. The reminder that you're never too old to pick up what you missed the first time around. Never too late to understand the lessons that patient teachers tried to share. The money sits in its trust, doing what Dorothy designed it to do, making things possible, opening doors, creating opportunities for people who need them, including me. I'm still figuring out who I am with this resource, this responsibility, this unexpected legacy, but I'm figuring it out honestly, without fraud or pretense or shortcuts. And I hope, that Dorothy Castellano, who I barely knew but who somehow knew me, would approve of that most of all.